So it's been a good morning, hasn't it?
Kind of good. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. I hope you haven't gotten too wet today. So it should be one of the nicest days of the year out here, but it is what it is. And it was pretty wet out on track. I can't pretend I enjoyed it that much because I don't really know these cars in these conditions. So it was pretty scary, and sketchy is a word you would use in places. But the cars are all in one piece. They're still shiny, still got four wheels. Where you're third on one in the grid, I'm 11th and 12th. We are in the other cars. So if it's a dry race, I think we should be moving forward.
Certainly should. Driving in the Jaguar E-Type 60th anniversary together. He's dragging me round, hopefully to the front of the field, and then driving other various cars in other races as well. But was it this wet the first time you came to Silverstone? When was the first time you came to Silverstone?
The first time I came to Silverstone was 1965, and I was at Cops Corner with my uncle and some friends. You used to bring cardboard boxes with you and bits of wood and pallet to get yourself a bit higher then. And my uncle wanted to see Jim Clark win the race, and he did, if I remember correctly. And so I've been coming to this place ever since the mid-60s. And he used to queue for hours and get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Then we managed to sort the roads out, thankfully. And I did my first race here in 1977.
So that was your first Grand Prix? Or is it Silverstone? No, Brands Hatch.
I'm not quite that old. Yeah. So no, it was in the touring cars, the Toyota touring car. My first Grand Prix here, I should have done 1984, but I'd already smashed myself up by then and had a broken leg.
So you hobbled in to watch, presumably, or you were still in hospital at that point, getting yourself put back together?
I was a month in hospital. But what I did do on crutches later that year was the British Truck Grand Prix at Donington, because Renault had a truck in it. So, and I nearly won that, which would have broken my heart to have won the British Truck Grand Prix, to be honest. Not what I need to do.
Well, it could have been a bit of a turn in career direction, potentially. Cat works driver, but so of all of the cars we see out on track, as I'm just watching it start to mist with rain again on the camera over there, looking at the sports car event we're going to do a little later on with a bit of despair, to be honest, watching more rainfall. But if you could pick any car this weekend to be in over these races, what would you choose?
Well, I like the cars that we've got, a lightweight E-Type and a pre-63 E-Type. I love the E-Type Jags. I was just talking upstairs actually about Nick Mason's 250 GTO. I raced a few times, which is sort of worth about $50 million, which is quite an expectation and pressure. But I love the sit-up Bentleys, the blowers, and pretty much everything I've seen. Some wonderful guys. I mean, the track action is just wonderful here, isn't it?
So when I said pick one,
there isn't just one. Yeah, well, absolutely one. The Lola you're about to go and qualify. I hope the sky's looking a bit angry over there for you.
Yeah, so that would be the car, the Lola T70 Mark III 1969 job. Is that just because it's got the most capacity of anything here, or
It sounds amazing and it looks great, and
a bit like us.
But it sounds really angry. So I don't know. I would imagine it's quite scary to drive, isn't it?
Yeah, reasonably. I mean, you have that great big Chevy V8 behind you. You've got loads of traction from the moon-sized rear tyres on it. But it's like all of those things. Once you get on top of it, you start to feel the limits of the car. All of a sudden, those things come to you, and you start to feel like you have a little bit of control over the direction of things. I remember the first time I ever raced a classic car, I came straight back in the pits and told the team it had 4 punctures. You've had a very similar experience as well. They just feel absolutely nothing like a modern racing car, do they? In the way that they move around, in the way that they float on track. And that's why you need that special skill, that focus to drive one.
I like the fact that you really have to drive these cars and shift the gear and get the clutch just right, and you are part of the car. It's a very analog experience, whereas I drive a lot of the more modern F1 cars. They're very digital, and they stick to the track, and it's a different challenge. But which car would you most like to race here?
To be honest, I think it's the same one, and I'm about to jump in it a little later on this evening if you're all prepared to get wet enough to watch. So let's say I'm Max Verstappen and I'm considerably faster, and I'm about to jump in a historic car for the first time. You've driven a modern F1 car. You've driven absolutely everything up until the absolutely latest.
I've driven 3 of the current hybrid ones.
So you're going to give me 3 pieces of advice. What are those pieces?
Well, the first thing I remember about Max Verstappen was doing a feature in an Aston Martin about 3 years ago in Melbourne. And basically he was terrified because he realised it got a manual gearbox and he didn't really know how to use one. He'd never raced a car, and he was all panicky because he thought he got to change gear. But Max, he goes out in his GT Cup car and he would get the hang of it quite quickly. So, a Formula 1 car is you drive it. If you brake 1 or 2 meters too early, you've wasted a corner. Whereas I remember when I was racing in the 80s, you had to shift the gears. If you got to the apex of the corner, pointing the right way in the right gear, it was quite a good place to be. Now, if you brake 2 meters too early, you've ruined it.
I think it was Tony Brooks we were lucky enough to sit next to in a very similar Q&A once, and I will ashamedly admit to referring to him as the gentleman on my left, because at that age I had no idea who he was. I've since learned, but he explained basically that in a modern Formula 1 car, when you lift the throttle, there's so much drag that actually you slow down quicker than Formula 1 cars of his era did with the brakes on at their absolute maximum capacity. So when Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen lift the throttle, that was as quick as they stopped back in the day.
Yeah, Sterling Moss, bless him, said exactly the same thing, that by lifting off the throttle in a Formula 1 car with all the downforce, you slow down more quickly than his brakes used to slow him down back in the day. But that's how they moved on. But the skill, as the greatest drivers still end up in the best cars and win the world championships. The cream always rises to the top in that respect.
So let's say you have the opportunity to rewind, let's say 20 years into the past, and you're back in professional racing mode.
Back at school.
What age? What age were you when you stopped?
In Formula 1, I was 36. But of course the drivers got older now. Fernando Alonso was 40 yesterday, wasn't he? And then I raced for another 6 years at Le Mans, so early 40s, which is fine.
So what type of modern motorsport appeals to you now? Let's say you had the opportunity to choose your career direction from scratch.
He's very good at this presenting, isn't he? Have you heard him commentate on F2 and F3? He's very good.
I'm supposed to be emceeing this.
He's tried. I know you're emceeing. I'm just pointing out what a good job that you're doing.
Get paid for this.
What was the question?
let's say you could jump into any modern racing car, any modern series with all of the bandits who are racing them right now. Which series would you pick?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd want to drive the latest Formula 1 cars because I spent 12 years of my life trying to make a car as perfect as you could, and they were a fraction as good as these latest ones. So these are just the evolution you were always dreaming of every night when you sat for hours with your engineer trying to make your F1 car a little bit better. You've now got something that's like some kind of Starship Enterprise.
You'd want to drive one, but would you want to race one? Because you sit behind somebody for 5, 10, 20 laps in the aero wash. It just looks so frustrating. When we both experienced that feeling in a car where you are stuck behind, you lose a little bit of downforce. Even in a downforced historic car, you lose a bit of downforce behind, and it sounds so pathetic, doesn't it? I was the much faster driver, but I couldn't get past. but they're so difficult to race wheel to wheel, these cars, with the amount of downforce they have.
They are, and that's why we're hoping next year's cars are better. But are you saying that on Sky F1 you think the Formula One's boring? Is that what you're actually saying here?
No, I'm saying I can't wait for the new evolution in 2022 Formula One, which is going to give us the wheel-to-wheel racing we've been looking for years.
Very corporate. So the race I most enjoyed doing was 2 years ago when we did the old Nürburgring together, GT4. I completely fell in love with the Nürburgring, the old Nordschleife. If you ever get a chance, you have to go over and see the racing there if you haven't already been.
It really is, over 200 corners, aren't there, around the Nürburgring? It's a 9-minute lap, 9:30 in a GT4 car. It was a little bit, actually, this morning's conditions reminded me a little bit of what it's like to head off around the Nürburgring in wet conditions. You get that standing water everywhere, but it's put up and shut up racing, isn't it? You've got to go out there and get the job done.
That's how I felt in the standing water today, like I was on that ride over there. That's about as much control as I felt in that E-Type.
I believe there was actually one point where I could have rotated the steering wheel all the way one way and all the way the other way, and I'm pretty sure it wouldn't have made much difference. But
no, but what I've learned today, as always, and something I told you many times when you were younger, is never underestimate anybody. And you turn up here and you have experts in the field of driving historic cars, and nothing more specialized than today in those conditions. They're very impressive racing, and it comes back to your point. If you put Verstappen or Hamilton out there today, they'd look pretty second rate. That was very specialist out there, no doubt about it.
Yeah, so we're loving it. We're driving all sorts of different cars. We're racing together here this weekend. That race will be on Sunday morning around 11:30, the E-Type 60th anniversary challenge. So we're going to be sharing the Jaguar Classic's own lightweight E-Type development car. And so if you're around on that day, come and watch us if you can. It'd be great if we could open up to some questions from the floor. Are
you starting the race? Because I don't like all that scary stuff.
Yeah, no, I'll start.
Good.
And we're starting 11th, so I'm not braking in the first corner.
Right. Who's got a microphone to do the questions?
We're going to run a relay the questions to you.
Right. Or just shout out. I'll answer this question while you're relaying that one. Yes, I do think the Formula One cars are too big. They've got the shadow plate of a Range Rover, full-size Range Rover. They're huge. And I also think, next year's cars will sit on the grid at over 900 kilograms with the little ballerinas in them and the full of fuel. So they're too big, too heavy. But unfortunately, with all the safety stuff, the heavier they get, the more safety, crash protection you need on them, and they're just growing. A bit like me.
My question is pretty similar. I was going to say, you were talking about the 2022 regulations. Would you have preferred to have seen maybe something about the length of the wheelbase as well? Because obviously we need loads of room for the new power units, etc. But even since 2014, the cars have just got so long.
Yeah, it's about... Do you want to answer this one now?
Yeah, I think it kind of relays off the fact that I actually feel that the power units are a little bit too complicated at the moment. Yes, we've got to have an element of hybridization. It's the way the world is going. But of course, the complexity of the power unit dominates the wheelbase in many ways. And when you look at the power units the way they are, and of course there are aerodynamic benefits, as you see with the Mercedes, which has the longest wheelbase on the grid at the moment. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for simplification of F1 cars, and I think that although OEMs and manufacturers want to demonstrate their competence in developing a power unit, the show would benefit from having simpler, lighter cars to race more aggressively wheel to wheel.
Will my F1 grid walks restart? I don't know. I think it's all changed because now we've got the national anthem and other procedures at on the grid. I don't think the drivers will want to go back, if they can help it, to being interviewed on the grid, because they've quite enjoyed less corporate work, less media work, and certainly less people like me rocking up as they're trying to think about a Grand Prix. So I think there'll be a few people like Lando and George, who seem very keen to have a chat. They're very generous. But I got a feeling the grid walk, as I know it from, well, I started in 1997, I think that it's kind of over because all the timings are wrong now. So I used to talk to the drivers on the grid, but now they, especially on a long lap like Spa, it takes them, they go through the pits, it takes them a long time to get to the grid. Then they go off to the bathroom and then they run to the front for the national anthem. So I think the grid walk is past its best, if I'm honest, I regret to say. Have we got any more questions? Have we? We can't have answered everything. There's a gentleman. I'm sorry? My mentor, who did I look up to? I was very privileged to meet Sir Jackie Stewart just before I got to Tyrrell, and he gave me a lot of help. I went around with him on his corporate work, and he's still a very good friend of mine today, and a man I would ring up to ask advice on certain things. Here comes your rain, your qualifying rain, Alex. I was teammates with Sterling Moss in 1981 in the Works Audi team. I wish I'd have spent more time talking to Sterling. I got to know Sterling very, very well later on in life, but I wish I'd have spent more time talking to him instead of just trying to beat him, frankly, because I was 30 years younger than him at the time, and I was just too competitive and too young and stupid and immature in terms of I had my blinkers on to try to beat Sterling Moss. There are a number of reference points, I think, through life. My dad was one, and some other people. Ken Tyrrell would be another wise old reference point who pull you to one side and sometimes tell you things you don't want to hear, but later on you did need to hear them. Ken told me to calm down just after I'd finished second in Detroit in his car. I missed winning the race by the length of that A40 there over Nelson Piquet, and Ken told me to calm down. I was expecting a pat on the back for finishing second in his little Tyrrell, and 5 days later I smashed myself to bits in Dallas, smashed my legs up, so he turned out to be right. There's some... Do I miss Bernie? Bernie called me the other day, actually, and he called me on my birthday too, which is nice of him. I had a few...
you happy birthday, or...
Sorry?
To wish you happy birthday.
No, I owed him 500 quid, apparently. Oh, okay. Bernie, I've had a few run-ins with Bernie when I was chairman of the Grand Prix Drivers Association. I used to be chairman of the board here at Silverstone, and with my TV work, I've had a few unpleasant phone calls. Bernie is Bernie, but we all did incredibly well hanging onto his shirt tails in Formula One. And, as Formula One grew, we all grew with it. So he's mellowed a bit now. He's 90. Now he's 90 and got a new baby. He's mellowed a bit. But anyway, Ace is called. But I do miss Bernie, actually. I miss him around the paddock. But it's time. I wish he'd have gone. I wish he'd have realised. But dictatorial or dictators don't ever see it like this, but I wish he'd have realised that his time was up and he should step aside and let some younger people like Domenicali come in, and then have been supportive to them, because I think he's still got a lot to give, but it all got quite fractious. But
do you wish that from his perspective or from the perspective of F1 as a whole?
Well, I think it comes back to the question of there about sage advice, and Bernie's forgotten more about Formula One than we knew, than we ever knew. But there are certain, he would never have let Netflix happen. He would never, which would have been a mistake. He would never have embraced. He thought the internet was just a passing fad, and social media was he would never let any free footage go out for that sort of thing. But he needed to, bring it up to modern times, but still keep that sort of, he knows the magic formula. And but Stefano Domenicali and Ross Brawn are a tremendous combo. So I think we're doing the king is dead, long live the king, isn't it? That sort of thing. George Orlando, you go with that one. I'll follow up with you. But George Orlando.
I think it's the moment where George has to make the step because he's been sitting there at Williams now for a couple of years. Lando is almost taking the McLaren boat, isn't he, to the front of the field with continuous podium finishes now, and you wonder whether McLaren could be becoming the front-running team that Lando would need to become the next great British driver after Lewis, and he could actually, do it in a storm of papaya-coloured McLaren. George has to get this gig, doesn't he? Either next to Lewis or, in any case, instead of Valtteri in the Mercedes. And the problem I think he's got is that Lewis will not want him there. Lewis wants to keep that comfortable position alongside Valtteri, and so he might have a little bit of pick there in the shape of Lewis Hamilton.
I think the future World Championships look like they're between Max, Charles Leclerc, maybe Carlos Sainz, George and Lando. That kind of talent's coming through now. So there's always some fresh talent coming through, thank goodness. But I do think we've got, places like Silverstone and Sky F1 and all that. Lewis is big business for this place. You can imagine driving the crowd and all that. But there's always somebody else coming along, and those two are wonderful talents.
Last question. Do you think they should redo the kart races such as Bercy?
Yeah.
Do you think they should bring
Bercy karting. Yeah, you got Racer Champions, haven't you? COVID sort of stopped a lot of that stuff.
Not quite the same as Bercy karting, though.
Yeah.
Bercy karting was mega.
Yeah, I like to see, but a lot of the teams don't want to risk their precious drivers doing that sort of thing, or them getting injured, But yeah, to see that, I think the drivers are up for it. The drivers would be up for equal karts, just going for it, especially if they can have a big old party all weekend, because they need to let off steam at the end of the season. But the Formula One season used to be over in middle of October, and now we're going to be lucky to be home for Christmas. It's changed that, and that has changed the dynamics of so many things now, of what happens in what's the closed season. And then, of course, straight into simulators and testing and that. It's almost a year-round thing now. So when we used to have a thing called the Racer Champions at the end of the season. It was four Formula One drivers versus 4 rally drivers. It was brilliant fun, but there's no space in the schedule anymore.
Or even something like M1 Pro Car, where they would throw the top 5 qualifiers in, but all of the drivers wouldn't want to have a shunt 5 minutes before the race, and wouldn't want to get tired out before they drove around Singapore for best part of 2 hours. So it's they got too much to do, haven't they? And especially in days of COVID-19, there's so much to consider. But I love it when Fernando jumped in all sorts of different cars, and Lando came and jumped in some sports cars and raced us as well in the World Endurance Championship in IMSA, and to get that crossover is always
yeah,
awesome.
The days when Jim Clark would be in a Lotus Cortina, a Formula 2 and a Formula 1 on the same day, that was magic. Absolutely, I remember that.
one driver at the moment that's doing F2 and 3, isn't there?
Nannini. Yeah, Nannini's jumping between the two, but he got a couple of good results in F2, and then in F3, and then decided F2 wasn't for him. But yeah, it's so difficult. Those series are so competitive, and as a stepping stone between F3 and F2, the two cars couldn't be more different in terms of their driving technique. One very much U-style, the other is a great big turbo powered brute. So yeah, super hard to do the two at the same time.
I think that's just about us polished up, isn't it, Al? You've got to get down to the wing.
I think it is. So thank you so much for listening to us chat about sports cars, F1 and all bits. And thanks for coming along. And check us out for the rest of the weekend if you can. Make sure you check out the rest of Flux Presents all the way through the weekend.